remember Ben Nighthorse Campbell, the former senator, died on Tuesday at the age of 92. Joining me now to talk more about his life and legacy is political analyst Dick Wadhams. Campbell was a member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe and an advocate for Native American issues. He also served as the chair of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. So, Dick, what do you remember most about him?
You know, more than just about any other major elected official in Colorado, Ben Campbell transcended party lines. I mean, he went from Democrat to Republican, but it was more than that. I mean, Ben was this unique combination of, he was very liberal socially, very conservative economically, and so he didn't really fit well in either party. So he was, in fact, I really think he was uncomfortable in either party. But one thing's for sure, the people liked him.
Yeah.
He never lost an election.
Yeah. Well, and what does that say about his status and how he related to people? The fact that he never lost an election, whether he was running as a Democrat or a Republican.
Well, he was an interesting guy. He was a unique guy. I mean, he rode a motorcycle. He was a very successful Indian jewelry artist, and he sold that. Had a very successful business. He had a ranch down in La Plata County, and so he just had these various parts of his background you don't see a lot. And then the ponytail. I mean, when Ben walked in a room, he was a big guy, and the ponytail, you knew when Ben got in there. He had a very powerful personality.
You mentioned the fact that he switched parties, going from a Democrat to a Republican in 1995. What do you think went into that decision, and what was that like for those of you who were in the political sphere at the time?
Well, what's interesting, I ran the Republican campaign against him in '92, so I was very well aware of his political strength. But he told me after he switched parties, he said, Democrats just beat up on me all the time because I support a balanced budget amendment, and he said I just got tired of it. And then he had a lot of Republican friends in the Senate, and I think that they said, "Come on over, Ben, we'll treat you right," and that's what happened. So.
And obviously, it ended up being the right decision for that time too. Yeah. How do you think he would have responded to today's political climate?
You know, it's interesting. I've been thinking about that since he passed away yesterday. Once again, he would not have fit in today's political parties. I mean, the Democrats have moved so far to the left. Republicans are moving too far to the right. I don't think he would be. I never talked to him since Trump emerged. I don't think he would like the way Trump behaves a lot of the time. I mean, Ben was a gentleman. So I don't think he would like today's political environment, frankly. Yeah. But believe me, he would still be popular.
Yeah. Well, certainly a legacy that he leaves behind. Dick, we appreciate you taking time to come kind of shed light on that. Current lawmakers also responding and sharing their memories of Campbell after his death. We have posted those statements for you on our website, cbscolorado.com.